The crowd roared as Muhammad Ali stumbled backward, his legs buckling under the weight of Joe Frazier's devastating left hook. Madison Square Garden shook with the collective gasp of 20,000 souls witnessing history unfold before their eyes. March 15, 1971. The fight of the century. Two undefeated champions colliding in a moment that would forever change both men. What the cheering masses couldn't possibly know was how this rivalry would end. Not with thunderous punches in a brightly lit ring, but in a quiet hospital room 30 years later, with a photo so raw and honest that no major publication dared to print it. "I hated that man," whispered Marcus Johnson, former photographer for Sports Illustrated, his weathered hands trembling as he slid the manila envelope across the table. "I was there for all three fights, you know. Watched those men try to kill each other. But what I saw in that hospital room in 2001, that's the real story nobody wanted to tell." The dim light of the coffee shop caught the edge of the faded photograph peeking from the envelope. A forbidden image capturing the final reconciliation between two of boxing's greatest warriors. One that challenges everything we thought we knew about their legendary feud. "They said it would tarnish their legacy," Marcus continued, voice breaking. "Said the public wasn't ready to see them like that. But I think the truth is it was too real, too human for a world that preferred their heroes locked in eternal combat." He pushed the envelope closer. "You're the first journalist I've shown this to in 24 years. Maybe now the world is finally ready." The bell above the coffee shop door jingled as a group of college students entered, laughing and shaking rain from their jackets. One wore a vintage Ali t-shirt, the champion's face frozen in youth and vigor, arms raised in triumph. A far cry from the man in the hidden photograph. Marcus noticed it too, a sad smile crossing his face. Everyone remembers the showman, the greatest of all time. Few remember the man. He tapped the envelope. "This is the man, not the myth. The question is, are you brave enough to tell that story?" Rain battered against the windows as thunder cracked overhead, almost as if the universe itself was acknowledging the weight of what was about to be revealed. The untold final chapter of boxing's most intense rivalry, captured in a single frame that no one was ever supposed to see. Mike Dawson, freelance journalist and lifelong boxing fan, felt his heart racing. After years of chasing this story, the truth was literally at his fingertips. He reached for the envelope, knowing that its contents would change everything, not just for Ali and Frazier's legacy, but perhaps for him too. Sometimes the stories that matter most are the ones hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone courageous enough to share them with the world. "Before I show you this," Marcus said, suddenly pulling the envelope back slightly, "you need to understand the context. You need to know what really happened between these men, not just what the headlines told you." His eyes burned with intensity. "Are you willing to hear the whole truth, even if it challenges everything you think you know about Ali and Smokin' Joe?" Mike nodded, though uncertainty flickered across his face. "That's why I'm here, to get the real story." "Then let's start at the beginning," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "Not with their first fight, but with their last conversation. The one nobody else heard. The weight of history hung in the air between them, heavier than any championship belt, as Marcus began to reveal what really happened when two bitter rivals faced their final round together, far from the spotlight that had defined their legendary careers. Nobody knew Ali was there that day, Marcus began, stirring his coffee absently. It was June 2nd, 2001, 5 years before Joe would pass away. I was at Philadelphia Hospital doing a piece on medical care for retired boxers. Pure coincidence. The old photographer's eyes seemed to look through the cafe wall, back through time to that sweltering summer day. I was walking down the hall when I saw him, Muhammad Ali shuffling along, leaning heavily on a cane. Parkinson's had already taken so much from him by then, but I recognized him instantly, the way he carried himself. Even hunched and trembling, something about him still commanded attention. Mike leaned forward, enthralled. Was he alone? Just his wife Lonnie and a nurse. No entourage, no cameras. I almost didn't approach him. Journalistic integrity and all that. But something told me this wasn't a coincidence. Marcus paused, taking a long sip of his cooling coffee. When I asked what brought him to Philly, Lonnie just gave me this look. Said, "He's here to see Joe." Thunder rumbled outside as rain pelted the windows, providing a dramatic backdrop to Marcus's revelation. Joe Frazier had been admitted 3 days earlier. Complications from diabetes and high blood pressure. Not many people knew he was there, but somehow Ali knew. Marcus's voice dropped lower. I asked if I could follow along just as a friend, not as press. Lonnie hesitated, but Ali, he just nodded. That slight, almost imperceptible nod he'd developed when speaking became too difficult. Mike scribbled notes furiously, his coffee forgotten. And Frazier agreed to see him? Marcus laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. That's the thing about their relationship that people never understood. The hatred was real, but so was the respect. It ran deeper than either man could explain. Joe had said some terrible things about Ali over the years, celebrated his illness as divine punishment. But when the nurse told him Muhammad was there, Marcus shook his head in wonder. Joe just said, "Send him in." The photographer described the hospital room, the antiseptic smell, the whirring of medical equipment, the afternoon sunlight filtering through half-drawn blinds. Joe Frazier, once the embodiment of physical power, looked diminished against the white sheets, though his eyes still held that fierce intensity that had intimidated so many opponents. Ali shuffled in slowly. Either man spoke for what felt like eternity. 30 years of rivalry, pain, respect, and regret hung in that silence. Marcus's voice grew soft with reverence. Then Joe said something I'll never forget. He said, "They made us hate each other, didn't they?" Mike's pen froze mid-sentence. He acknowledged it, the manipulation. More than that, Marcus continued. Ali made his way to the bedside, each step a battle against his own failing body. He reached out, his hand trembling uncontrollably from the Parkinson's, and Joe took it. Two once powerful hands, now weakened by time and punishment, clasped together. Marcus described how Ali, with great effort, managed to whisper, "They needed us to be enemies, but we made each other great." Frazier's eyes welled up. This man who'd carried bitterness for decades simply nodded and said, "Greatest rivalry in sports. Couldn't have done it without you, champ." Marcus paused, composing himself. Then something remarkable happened. Joe shifted in his bed, making room, and patted the space beside him. Without a word, Ali sat down on the edge of the hospital bed. Two old warriors side by side, their bodies betraying the greatness that once resided in them. Mike could barely breathe. "And that's when you took the photo?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I shouldn't have. Journalistic instinct took over. I had my small camera in my bag, always carried it. One quick, silent shot. Neither of them noticed. When I developed it later," Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "It wasn't just two boxers making peace. It was two black men who'd been pitted against each other their entire careers. The outspoken, beautiful Ali and the workmanlike, reserved Frazier, finally acknowledging the system that had profited from their division." He pulled the photograph partially from the envelope, just enough for Mike to glimpse two elderly men sitting side by side on a hospital bed, hands clasped, heads bowed together in what looked almost like prayer. I took it to my editor the next day. Thought it would be the cover of Sports Illustrated. Marcus's face darkened. He took one look and said, "We can't run this." "Why not?" Mike asked, though he was beginning to understand. He said America wasn't ready to see them like this, vulnerable, frail, united. Said it would diminish their legacy. What he meant was, it would complicate the narrative they'd sold for decades. Marcus carefully slid the photo back into the envelope. Every major publication turned it down. They preferred Ali and Frazier frozen in time, eternally at war. The reconciliation didn't fit the story they'd been selling since 1971. Mike sat back, processing the revelation. "So what happened after that moment? Did they stay in touch?" Marcus shook his head. "That's the tragedy. That was their last meeting. Joe's health improved. He was discharged the next day. Ali's condition continued to deteriorate, but something changed between them. When reporters would try to bait Joe into criticizing Ali after that, he'd just say, 'That's my brother.' No more bitterness." A notification pinged on Mike's phone. Breaking news about a current heavyweight title controversy. The present intruding on this sacred glimpse of the past. "So now you know the context," Marcus said, sliding the envelope fully across the table. "The question is, what will you do with it? Are you ready to tell the story that no one wanted told 24 years ago?" Mike stared at the envelope, understanding the responsibility it represented. The true final round of boxing's greatest rivalry. Not fought with fists, but with forgiveness. "People think they know everything about Ali and Frazier," Marcus said, rising from his chair with effort. "But they only know what they were allowed to see. Perhaps now the world is finally ready for the truth." As Marcus headed for the door, Mike called after him, "Why me? Why now, after all these years?" The old photographer paused, raindrops dancing in the light behind him. "Because you weren't looking for another boxing story. You were looking for the truth." With that, he stepped out into the downpour, leaving Mike alone with history literally in his hands. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the coffee shop in stark white light for a brief moment, not unlike the flashbulbs that had captured Ali and Frazier in their prime, preserving their combat for eternity, while leaving their humanity in the shadows. But it wasn't just about the photo, Marcus explained the next morning as they walked through the Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York. Mike had convinced the photographer to meet him here, surrounded by the legacy both men had helped build. It was about what happened before I took it, the conversation they had when they thought no one was listening. Glass cases housed gloves, robes, and championship belts, the physical artifacts of boxing history. But Marcus moved past these treasures with barely a glance, heading toward a quiet corner displaying photographs from the Ali Frazier trilogy, their epic battles frozen in time: Manila, New York, the Thrilla, the Chilla, the Killa, 3 fights that defined an era. Everyone remembers Ali's taunts, calling Joe a gorilla, and Uncle Tom, turning fans against him, but few remember what those words really cost both men. Marcus gestured to a photo of Frazier landing his famous left hook in their first fight. Joe carried the scars of those insults his entire life. His children were bullied at school. He faced death threats from Ali fans, all while fighting in Ali's shadow despite beating him in their first match. Mike studied the photographs, seeing them with new eyes. Ali was playing a role, wasn't he? Selling tickets? That's the convenient explanation, Marcus replied. But in that hospital room, Ali confessed something different. He admitted he'd gone too far, that in trying to promote their fights, he'd crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, that he'd been young, arrogant, and hadn't considered how his words would follow Joe forever. They stopped before a particularly powerful image: Frazier being held back from Ali at a press conference, face contorted with genuine rage. "You have to understand the context," Marcus continued. Ali was the handsome, charismatic poet. Frazier was the blue-collar slugger from the slaughterhouse. When Ali painted Joe as the white man's champion, it devastated him. Joe had grown up in poverty in South Carolina, picking cotton as a child. He'd faced just as much racism as Ali, but quietly, without the protective shield of celebrity Ali enjoyed. Mike nodded slowly. And yet Joe supported Ali when his title was stripped for refusing the draft. Even gave him money. $1,500 a month while Ali couldn't fight, Marcus confirmed. Joe lobbied President Nixon to reinstate Ali's license. Then Ali repaid that loyalty by depicting Joe as a traitor to his race. The old photographer shook his head sadly. In the hospital, Ali told Joe that was his greatest regret. Not losing fights, not even losing his health, but the pain he'd caused the one man who'd supported him when the world turned its back. They moved to a bench in a quiet corner of the museum, Marcus's knees creaking as he sat down. Morning light streamed through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. "Joe's response is what you need to understand," Marcus said, voice dropping. He told Ali, "I hated you for years because you made me the villain in my own community. But they turned us into gladiators, 2 black men fighting for white entertainment. They profited from our division." Mike felt a chill despite the warm museum air. And what did Ali say to that? He could barely speak by then, but he managed 3 words. "We were played." Marcus stared at his hands. That's when Joe moved over and Ali sat beside him on that hospital bed. 2 old warriors finally recognizing that their greatest fight hadn't been against each other, but against a system that commodified their conflict, that reduced them to convenient stereotypes, the rebel and the establishment man, when the truth was far more complex. Mike thought about the iconic images that had defined this rivalry for generations. Ali standing over a fallen Frazier, taunting him. Frazier's hook sending Ali to the canvas. Both men, nearly blind, hammering each other in the Philippine heat. "In the photo you took," Mike asked carefully, "what exactly are they doing?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Praying." Joe was a devout Christian his whole life. Ali, of course, had his Muslim faith. But in that moment, differences aside, Joe suggested they pray together. So that's what they did. Each in his own way, heads bowed, hands clasped. 2 men seeking peace after a lifetime of being defined by conflict. A tour group moved noisily through a nearby gallery, their guide's voice rising as he described the brutal 15th round of the Thrilla in Manila, how close Frazier's trainer Eddie Futch had been to letting his fighter continue despite being nearly blind. That's what makes the photo so powerful, Marcus continued once the group had passed, and that's why no one would publish it. It contradicted the narrative they'd sold for decades. It humanized men who were more valuable as icons, as symbols. It showed vulnerability in fighters who were marketed as indestructible. Mike considered this as they rose and continued their tour, stopping before a wall dedicated to the Thrilla in Manila, widely considered one of the most brutal championship fights in history. After that third fight, Ali called it the closest thing to death he'd ever experienced, Marcus said. But in that hospital room, he told Joe something different. He said Manila haunted him, not because of what it took from him physically, but because he realized in that ring that he truly respected Joe, even as he was trying to destroy him. He told Joe he'd carried the guilt of that contradiction for 26 years. They paused before a famous quote from Ali, etched into the wall. "It will be a killa and a chilla and a thrilla when I get the gorilla in Manila. Words have power," Marcus said quietly. Ali knew that better than anyone. He wielded them like weapons. But in that hospital room, with his voice nearly gone, he found the words that mattered most. "I'm sorry." Mike felt the weight of this revelation. And Joe forgave him, after everything? "That's the thing about forgiveness," Marcus replied. "It's not always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's as simple as making room on a hospital bed. As Joe put it, carrying hate is heavier than carrying any championship belt." As they completed their circuit of the museum, ending where they began, Mike realized something profound. The entire facility, dedicated to preserving boxing history, contained not a single image that captured what Marcus had witnessed. The true final chapter of boxing's greatest rivalry remained untold. "The photo shows something else," Marcus said as they prepared to leave. "Something I didn't understand until years later. These men weren't just making peace with each other. They were making peace with their legacies, with what the sport had taken from them, both suffering from the physical toll of their battles, Ali with Parkinson's, Joe with his health problems and damaged eyesight. In that moment, they acknowledged the sacrifice without regret or bitterness. Outside, in the museum parking lot, Marcus paused beside his car. The editors who rejected that photo said the public prefers their legends untarnished by human frailty. But I've always believed the opposite, that acknowledging vulnerability doesn't diminish greatness. It completes it. Mike nodded, thinking of the manila envelope waiting in his hotel room. "I'm beginning to understand why this story needs to be told now. The world has changed," Marcus said, unlocking his car door. "Maybe now people are ready to see strength and reconciliation, not just in conflict. To recognize that the greatest victory isn't winning a fight, it's finding peace after the battle ends." As Marcus drove away, Mike remained in the parking lot, surrounded by the cars of tourists who had come to celebrate the violence and spectacle of boxing. He wondered how many would be equally moved by a quiet moment of prayer between two former enemies, finding common ground in their shared humanity when the fighting was done. He pulled out his phone and looked at the digital copy of the photograph Marcus had sent him. Insurance against anything happening to the original. In it, he could see something that had been missing from every other image of these men. Peace. And he knew then what he had to do with this sacred trust he'd been given. 3 days later, Mike sat nervously in the office of Elena Rodriguez, editor-in-chief of Global Sports magazine. His pitch meeting had been scheduled for 15 minutes, but he'd been waiting for nearly 45. Through the glass walls, he could see Elena on the phone, gesturing emphatically, clearly dealing with some crisis. The manila envelope sat heavy in his lap, containing not just a photograph but a moment of history that had been hidden for nearly a quarter-century. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Any news?" Before he could reply, Elena's door opened. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mike. Complete disaster with our cover story. Let's make this quick. You mentioned you have something on Ali and Frazier?" Mike followed her into the sleek office, walls adorned with framed magazine covers spanning decades of sports history. Ali featured prominently in several, always in his prime, always triumphant. "I appreciate your time," Mike began, settling into a chair across from Elena's desk. "What I have is unprecedented. The last meeting between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, captured in a single photograph that's never been published." Elena's eyebrow raised slightly. Her interest peaked despite her obvious time constraints. "Their last meeting? When was this taken? June 2001, Philadelphia. 5 years before Frazier's death. Mike carefully removed the photograph from its envelope, holding it face down. But before I show you this, I need your commitment that if you publish it, you'll run the complete story behind it. No sensationalism, no reducing it to a curiosity. The full context of what this moment meant. Elena leaned back, studying him with newfound respect. You've got my attention, let's see what you've got. Mike handed over the photograph. Elena's expression transformed as she took in the image. First surprise, then something deeper, more profound. She stared at it for a long moment, professional detachment giving way to genuine emotion. This is, she began, then stopped, collecting herself. Who took this? How has it never been seen? Mike explained Marcus's story, the rejections from publishers, the belief that the public wasn't ready to see these icons in such a vulnerable state. As he spoke, Elena continued to study the photograph, occasionally nodding. Times have changed, she said finally, looking up. 24 years ago, maybe the editors were right. Sports coverage was different then, all about building myths, not examining them. She set the photo carefully on her desk. But today's readers want authenticity. They're tired of sanitized stories. Mike felt a surge of hope. So you'll publish it? Not just publish it, Elena replied, a plan clearly forming in her mind. I want to make it the centerpiece of our legacy issue next month. A full feature on reconciliation in sports with this as the anchor. She gestured to the photo. But I need to know everything. Every detail of that meeting. Exactly what was said. The full context. And I need to verify it. Marcus Johnson is prepared to go on record, Mike assured her. And there are hospital records confirming both men were there that day. Lonnie Ali is still alive. She might be willing to corroborate as well. Elena nodded, her earlier hurry forgotten as she fully engaged with the opportunity before her. We'll need to approach this with absolute respect. These men aren't just sports figures, they're cultural icons whose rivalry transcended boxing. That's exactly why this matters, Mike said earnestly. Everyone knows about their fights, but almost no one knows how their story really ended. It changes everything about how we understand their relationship. Elena studied the photo again. Two giants of the sport brought low by age and illness, finding peace after decades of animosity. It's powerful. She looked up at Mike. But we need to consider the families. How do you think they'll react? Marcus believes they'll welcome it, Mike replied. Especially Joe's family. They've lived with him being cast as the villain in Ali's story for 50 years. This photo shows the respect Ali truly had for him. It honors both men equally. Elena was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing professional considerations against ethical ones. Finally, she nodded decisively. Let's do it right. I want you to write the feature. Work with our fact-checkers to verify everything. We'll approach both families for comments but make it clear we're publishing either way. This is history that deserves to be known. She carefully returned the photo to its envelope. We'll need to digitize this properly. Archival quality. Mike felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. After 5 decades, the true final chapter of boxing's greatest rivalry would finally be told. One more thing, Elena added, her expression serious. This can't just be about one photo, powerful as it is. I want you to explore what this reconciliation means in a broader context. How we pit athletes against each other. How we profit from conflict. How we rarely allow our sports heroes the dignity of vulnerability or growth. Mike nodded, already envisioning how the article would take shape. That's exactly what Marcus and I discussed. This isn't just about Ali and Frazier. It's about how we create and consume sports narratives. As Mike left Elena's office with a formal assignment and the photograph safely secured for professional digitization, he texted Marcus the good news. The reply came quickly. After 24 years, the truth deserves its moment. Those men deserved better then. At least they'll get justice now. 6 weeks later, Mike stood in a convenience store staring at the magazine rack where the new issue of Global Sports had just been placed. The cover featured the photograph, Ali and Frazier side by side on that hospital bed, heads bowed in prayer, hands clasped in reconciliation. The headline read simply, "The Final Round, the untold end to boxing's greatest rivalry." His phone rang, Marcus calling from Philadelphia. "I'm looking at it right now," the photographer said, voice thick with emotion. "All these years I thought no one wanted to see the truth. Turns out we just needed the right time and the right person to tell it." Mike watched as a young man picked up the magazine, studied the cover with interest, and added it to his purchases. "It's more than a boxing story," Mike replied. "It's about finding peace after a lifetime of being defined by conflict. I think that resonates with people now more than ever." "Joe would be pleased," Marcus said quietly. He always felt history had been unfair to him. This sets the record straight. After hanging up, Mike continued watching customers' reactions to the magazine. An elderly man stopped, adjusted his glasses, and stared at the cover for a long moment, before slowly reaching for a copy, his hands trembling slightly, perhaps remembering watching those epic battles in his younger days. A teenage girl, probably not even born when the photo was taken, picked up the magazine and showed it to her friend. "My dad talks about these guys all the time," Mike overheard her say. The photo was doing exactly what great journalism should: bridging generations, challenging assumptions, completing a narrative that had been left unfinished for too long. Mike purchased his own copy and stepped outside into the bright sunshine. He flipped to his article, to the words he'd labored over for weeks, trying to do justice to the moment Marcus had captured. In the end, what Ali and Frazier showed us in that quiet hospital room was more courageous than any punch thrown in their legendary trilogy. They showed us that reconciliation requires more bravery than combat, that forgiveness is the ultimate victory, and that even the most bitter rivalries can give way to respect and understanding. In their final meeting, these two warriors fought their greatest fight, not against each other but against bitterness, against time, against the narratives that had imprisoned them both. And in doing so, they achieved their most meaningful win, together. As he closed the magazine, Mike's phone chimed with a notification. The online version of the article was trending, being shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Comments flooded in from around the world. Boxing fans, historians, people who'd never followed the sport but were moved by the story of reconciliation. The truth, hidden for 24 years, was finally having its moment. And somewhere, Mike liked to think, two old warriors were looking down, nodding in approval, finally united in the way they'd always deserved to be remembered, not just as opponents who brought out the best in each other, but as men who found the courage to make peace when the fighting was done. For in the end, the greatest victory isn't won in the ring with fists, but in the heart with forgiveness.